Jiralhanae funeral tradition, much like the other aspects of Jiralhanae belief, is rooted in the worship of the moons, Wariel, Tish, and Soy-Rapt, which once orbited the now-destroyed Doizak. The affair was known to be a glorious and brutal one, with the dead unceremoniously severed into three: hand, head, and body, done by a render whose sole job it was to butcher the dead. In the days of old, there were so many renders that it was enough to form their own roaming clans to service the constant flow of corpses, due of course to the Jiralhane's war-driven society. And upon the hand of the dead, they would carve the symbol for Soy-Rapt, the head Wariel, and the body with Tish. The funeral would then last for 4 days, and each of the last 3 nights, these symbols would be carved into the flesh of each part, acting as blood tithes to the moons. Then, on the final night, the body would be left to the elements, allowing the beasts of Doizak to feast upon the remains and do with it as nature intended. During their time with the Covenant, those who secretly carried on this tradition had revised it slightly to accommodate their situations, simply carving symbols on the body, head, and hands, then leaving the body where it laid, tossing it out of an airlock, or disposing of it in an incinerator. The Kig-Yar are a species that can be broken up into at least 3 distinct subtypes that all present vastly different morphological features. These include the Rutian, the Ibashan, and the Thawing. Rutians are probably the jackals that you are the most familiar with, denoted by their light to tan skin, elongated heads with beak-like snouts, and sexual dimorphism expressed through quills in males and plated or downy feathers in females. The Ibashan, however, retain more ancestral traits, presenting with shorter snouts, almost saurian-like heads, armored neck scales in both sexes, and even a vestigial tail. Another key difference between the two is that the Ibashan were a relatively late addition to the Covenant military, having only been incorporated as early as 2526, despite their species' long-standing relationship with the Empire. Now, unlike the previous 2 subtypes, the Thawing split off from the rest of their species many years ago, having migrated from their homeworld of Ain to the high-gravity asteroid of Tavau. And due to the heightened environmental pressures there, the Thawings developed darker skin, bony facial coverings, and true feathers spread across their body. The heightened gravity of the world also led to stockier builds, granting them the ability to leap vast distances and run at incredible speeds. And while the Thawings were almost exclusively the only Kig-Yar to hold the role of skirmisher within the Covenant military, it was not a role specific to them, as the role of skirmisher was deeply rooted in their ancient history as a species and was a title bestowed to their warriors. And this is why in more recent years, members of the Rutian subtype are also shown as holding the title within the ranks of the Banished. Halo Infinite's map launch site is set within a UNSC facility utilized by the 22nd First Response Wing of the UNSC's Planetary Defense Force. The nearby area is littered with storage bays, hangars, and the type of structures that are commonly seen with these types of facilities. And within the playable area rests an FSS-1000 Sabre that is preparing to launch from Launchpad 3. And while there is little to no details that can really tell us what colony or planet this map is set on, one could see the remnants of a shattered moon in the sky just overhead. Whether this was due to the use of experimental weaponry or a recent battle is still unknown at this time. The M7 submachine gun is a fully automatic personal defense weapon developed and manufactured by Mizraia Armory. Having been originally developed as an emergency weapon to defend vehicle crews during the insurrection, the weapon quickly saw widespread deployment and is now a staple for the infantry, special forces, and vehicle crews of the UNSC's armed forces. The weapon's titanium design is compact, featuring a polymer pistol grip, iron sights, folding foregrip, and an adjustable stock to reduce recoil at medium ranges. The weapon fires 5x23mm caseless full metal jacket rounds from a 60-round magazine, with ammunition being loaded horizontally on the side of the weapon. And unlike the majority of the UNSC arsenal, the standard M7 does not have an ejection port, as its caseless rounds use a combustible adhesive for propulsion rather than the conventional bullet design, which would have the projectile, primer, and propellant all within metallic casing. And while there are dozens of variants which offer mission-specific improvements, some of which do indeed fire standard 5x23mm ammunition, the most notable is its suppressed variant, which is often issued to Special Forces operatives for its more stealth-driven approach. It's also worth mentioning that in the post-war era, the UNSC has transitioned from the M7 SMG to the M20 PDW as its primary submachine gun model, with its high-velocity armor-piercing rounds being far more effective at dealing with military-grade armor and energy shielding technology. Over the years, the Halo universe has shown us a number of medical technologies and advancements that may await the human race in the not-so-distant future, and probably the most astounding of them, at least when you consider the dilemmas of our time, is the fact that cancer has been essentially eradicated. And this was first discussed in the story Midnight in the Heart of Midlothian, when the main character was diagnosed with it. And despite the general feeling of despair we might have when getting that news today, the doctor actually had to look up what cancer even was, saying that it hadn't been an issue since the 22nd century, and it would only require a short procedure with a couple steps to remove. Now, that's probably the most clickbaity example, but another great one is Targeted Nanoparticle Therapy and Repair, or TNTRs, essentially nanobots that enter a person's body and can be remotely controlled to repair damaged areas or even organs themselves. In Halo Edge of Dawn, we saw them being used by a surgeon to help repair internal damage to combat medic Lucas Browning, and then again later used by Joy Use to assist with heart and brain function when the subject was dying. And another obvious standout in medical advancements is flash cloning technology, which most Halo fans would probably recognize as being a key aspect of the Spartan 2 program. And while this specific use case was incredibly illegal, as they used the flash clones to hide the fact that they abducted children candidates of the program, flash cloning is actually super common, having been a standard practice adopted across the galaxy for hundreds of years. And whether it be for civilian or military purposes, the technology could be used for either organ or limb replacements, whether it be done in a device as small as a shoebox or even within the patient's own body. It was also notably used by Dr. Catherine Halsey again to help her create her own smart AIs, something that I've actually covered in some previous shorts. But TNTRs and flash cloning each totally deserve a whole video just about them, so be sure to subscribe or follow, and stay tuned for more. In Halo Edge of Dawn, we see that following the death of Escharum, there is a huge void in the power structure with the Banished. And if we're being honest, things were already pretty shaky with the Chief taking out over a dozen high-value individuals. So on the final day of the 4-day-long funeral for Escharum, 4 potential replacements for him had gathered at the House of Reckoning to stake their claim at leadership. And among them were Ballas, chieftain of the Ravaged Tusks, one of the few responsible for Atriox's return to the galaxy, Galleon, chieftain of the Witch's Eye, another Jiralhanae with plenty of experience and just as large a following as Ballas, Valis Sumai, a Sangheili warlord with a reputable service record and an impressive following of Sangheili, Ungoi, Kig-Yar, and humans, and lastly Denacrium, the weakest of the commanders, but a member of the same clan as Escharum. Each of these individuals tried their best to gain the favor of the crowd, with Galleon suggesting that every human, including those within the ranks of the Banished, should be ripped limb from limb, and Val Hasumai saying that they should instead focus on the destruction of Earth. And if you've watched my full summary on the novel, you'll know that right after this, Galleon then tries to call out Jaeger Adamni, gets killed, and then Ballas reveals the human prisoner Lucas Browning. Things then start to get out of hand, Jaeger retreats with Browning, and the Master Chief, who had been watching all of this unfold, abandons his position and follows. But as he was leaving, he had Joy drop a nuke on the House of Reckoning, which presumably killed all 4 of these potential replacements and thousands of other Banished troops who had attended the funeral. Now, where exactly this leaves Banished leadership is unclear, but I'd love to know your guys' theories, so be sure to comment below on who you think the new leader of the Banished should be. So, a few months ago, I made a video where I talked about whether or not the Gasgira, or Skimmers, were still a part, or at least loyal to, the Banished. The general consensus that we've all come to as a community is yes, because we didn't really have any other reason to think otherwise. But in Chapter 36 of Halo Edge of Dawn, it was actually confirmed that they are still working with the mercenary group, having been deployed to try and stop the Chief as he escaped the Silent Auditorium. But even with that confirmation, I keep coming back to the question of, why are they still in the Banished? I understand that Escharum commanded that they be incorporated back when the Harbinger was first released from her Silex, but I wonder why, even after his death and the death of the Harbinger, are they still following orders and haven't just been turned on by the other species? I suppose there could be a couple reasons as to why, but it's worth mentioning that in the novel, there was a section that took place nearly 100,000 years ago, and this is where we learned that the Gasgira are actually a thrall species created by the Zalanin, sort of like how the Forerunners had created the Hurugok. So I guess my question really is, are they sticking around because the Harbinger commanded them to? Is it because they're servant tools with no real free will? Or are they just biding their time until their masters, the Endless, return? Well, we'll probably just have to wait until Halo 7 to know for sure, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments. You ever wonder what happened to this guy?
I am ordering you to surrender that AI! No, sir.
Well, if you don't remember, this is Andrew Del Rio, and when we first met him in Halo 4, he was the captain of the UNSC Infinity, and despite his crucial role as a leader, others, such as Margaret Parangowski, felt like he was more of a manager, as no one under his command had ever truly respected or been inspired by him. And during the early days of the Requiem conflict, this was put on full display, due to his treatment and decision to threaten and then abandon the Master Chief on the Shield world. Refusing to arrest or hinder the Chief, some even chose to give him the resources so that he could pursue the Didact on his own. And when the ship was returned home, Del Rio was ultimately relieved of his command and replaced by Thomas Lasky, whom I think we all can agree was a much better captain. Now, he was ultimately reprimanded for his actions, but given the fact that the Didact did indeed make it to Earth and compose the residents of New Phoenix, UNSC leadership didn't outright discharge him from the service. Yet, as the investigations into his actions on Requiem continued, he chose to retire. Then, using his connections and favors that he had built up over the years, was able to find a surprisingly successful career in politics, quickly assuming the role of a UEG senator for one of Jupiter's moon colonies. And much to no one's surprise, when the Master Chief was framed with treason for a terrorist attack in 2558, led by Sapien Sunrise, Del Rio was happy to take advantage of the situation, creating a narrative that John was indeed a false hero and had called for not only his imprisonment, but also the decommissioning of the remaining Spartan 2s. But when the UEG eventually released footage that proved Chief's innocence, Del Rio quickly retracted his statements and took a leave of absence for unrelated family matters. One of the most interesting aspects of Mjolnir Mark V, the armor that we see Master Chief wearing throughout the course of Halo CE, is that it wasn't even in service for one whole year, which is kind of crazy when you consider that the Mark IV had been in service for over 2 decades, with Chief himself really only wearing the armor for 2 months before getting the upgrade to the Mark VI armor we saw him wearing in Halo 2 and 3. And despite its short lifespan, it had actually begun its development all the way back in 2542, with one of the big selling points being that it would feature hundreds of minor improvements from the Mark IV, such as an armor plating redesign and the capacity to house and pair a ship-grade smart AI with its Spartan wearer. And while the Mark IV had already seen the testing of experimental reverse-engineered Covenant shield gauntlet technology in the form of personal energy shielding systems, the Mark V would have it as a standard feature. Say that sentence 3 times fast. Oof. But an important thing to understand is that the first iteration of Mark V wouldn't enter production until October of 2551, being the Mark V-B, which saw a limited release for testing with only a few Spartan 2 and 3 personnel. This version did not have the AI housing capabilities. However, the second iteration of Mark V, which was unveiled in August of 2552, did have the feature in hopes that it would equip the Spartan 2s with everything that they would need for Operation Red Flag. Now, at the same time Mark V was entering production, a top-secret program was also being developed in parallel, known as Mjolnir Black. This armor, built on the findings of the entire Mjolnir program, was a much more streamlined and compact version than all previous designs, even hosting technological systems that were not yet available on the Mjolnir platform. But with the fall of Reach and Operation Red Flag being effectively cancelled, the surviving Spartans then returned to Earth and were outfitted with what would come to be known as Mark VI. Operation Red Flag was a covert ONI mission developed near the end of the Human Covenant War, at a point when desperate measures had to be taken in order to prevent the total extinction of humanity. In short, the mission was intended to go after Covenant leadership directly, tasking the Spartan 2s with the infiltration of a capital ship and the capturing of one of the High Prophets, whom they could leverage to force a truce. And to give the Spartans the best chances for success, they were issued the recently unveiled Mjolnir Mark V armor, which for the first time could fully integrate a ship-grade smart AI with its Spartan wearer. This would be a crucial tool for the mission, as it would allow them the ability to tap into the Covenant's navigational database and learn the location of the Covenant's capital world High Charity. And after finding that all of the other candidates were inadequate, Dr. Catherine Halsey would flash clone herself to create the perfect AI, Cortana, who would be assigned to John 117 shortly before the operation was set to begin. Additionally, the recently retrofitted ship UNSC Pillar of Autumn and its captain, Jacob Keyes, alongside a battalion of ODSTs led by Major Antonio Silva, would provide support for the mission. Now, Red Flag was originally scheduled to launch from Reach, with the planet's high concentration of Forerunner artifacts ensuring that it would eventually attract the Covenant's attention. But when they discovered and launched a full-scale invasion of the planet far earlier than ONI had anticipated, the Spartans were instead scattered across Reach for emergency combat operations. Sadly, many of the Spartans who had been recalled for the operation would die during the invasion, and with the fall of Reach imminent, the Pillar of Autumn, carrying Cortana and the Master Chief, was forced to escape into slipspace. Red Flag was then effectively cancelled, but was not formally called off. Halo Infinite's map Prism is set within the mines of Shuari on Suban, with the mine itself having recently fallen under Banished control. Lining the playable area are raw formations of Chemic Suru, the highly volatile crystalline material which is used as ammunition for needle-based weapons such as the Needler and Needle Rifle. Now, despite the fact that the needles are said to only take on their unique threat-seeking nature when primed by internal mechanisms in weaponry, there are Chemic Suru veins around the map, which appear to have already been primed and will seek out targets when disturbed. And in the nearby sky, one could also see a battle between Banished and Swords of Sanghelios forces is underway, with it being known that the Banished Dreadnought Ghosts of Barillon leads the several dozen Carves and hundreds of Eklon Dahl Workshop Phantoms against the Sangheli fleet of Hakars, Ta pattern blockade runners, Zanar pattern light cruisers, and Meek Pramu patterned phantoms. As mentioned, the mine falling under Banished control is a relatively recent change, as in 2560, a joint UNSC and Swords of Sanghelios task force had failed to repel invaders and were forced to retreat. And given that Sangheli leadership continues to debate the future of their species, the loss of more mines such as Shuari is sure to continue. When it comes to space travel, voyages can take days, months, or even years, even in slipspace. This is why cryosleep, also known as cryogenic stasis, is perhaps one of humanity's most essential survival technologies. It reduces the amount of food and resources needed to keep the crews of ships alive, and as a bonus, makes it so a person's body doesn't actually age while in transit, which leads to an interesting phenomenon between biological and actual age, but that's a topic for a different video. The cryosleep process itself, though, can be broken down into two stages: the put-down cycle and the wake-up cycle. During put-down, individuals are first administered a cytoprethyline injection, a compound that prevents ice crystals from forming in their cells. Then, once sealed in their pod, they're exposed to an anesthetic gas, followed shortly by another gas that forms a bronchial suffocant that coats the lungs. The body is then rapidly cooled, and an electrical shock is administered, causing the heart to cease function. For wake-up, the individual's temperature is raised in a controlled manner, and another electrical current restarts the heart. After roughly 15 minutes, they then take their first breath, coughing and swallowing that bronchial suffocant. This is described as unpleasant, but it contains much-needed nutrients after prolonged periods in stasis. Now, there's also an accelerated wake-up process referred to as flash thawing, which is incredibly dangerous and has a high chance of complications and even death. Reserved only for emergencies, heating coils coupled with a rapid infusion of stimulants, notably adrenaline, are used to bring a person out of cryosleep in less than 5 minutes. For Spartan 2s, this process is actually something they had trained their bodies to respond well to, and they can usually walk away from it with little to almost no side effects. This is attributed to their augmentations, but also the fact that they would normally enter stasis while in their Mjolnir armor so that they could emerge from cryo at a moment's notice, being battle ready. The Javokata Workshop Deathlobber, more commonly known as the Brute Shot, is a Jiralhanae designed grenade launcher that was in use decades before their species was integrated into the Covenant's ranks. The weapon is easily recognizable by its large tungsten alloy blade, which protrudes past the base of the weapon's unique circular grip. And in the hands of the right user, the weapon could be just as deadly as a melee weapon capable of cleaving enemies in two. But in terms of the ammunition itself, it utilizes 52mm high explosive concussive grenades. Dependent upon the variant, it could hold 4 to 6 rounds at a time, which are belt-fed through the top of the weapon into its internal magazine autoloader. And as for those variants, the UNSC had encountered 2 over the course of the Human Covenant War, being the standard Type 25, which had grenades that primed upon impact, allowing them to ricochet off of some surfaces, and the Type 25B, which was the simpler, mass-produced version with its grenades primed in the firing chamber so that they would detonate upon impact. And while once manufactured by the Sacred Promissary for Covenant troops, the weapons production has moved to the Javokata Foundry to continue supplying Banished forces. The benefits of cryosleep will always outweigh the negatives, but that's not to say that it doesn't come with its own dangers. And yes, the mucousy lime-flavored bronchial surfactant does sound unpleasant, but there are real dangers that come with the process. The most common one is that you'll need to enter the chamber completely naked or risk your clothing adhering to your skin, and then upon thawing, your skin will be left raw and covered in painful blisters. Now, the UNSC had developed skin-forming suits that could withstand the low temperatures of cryosleep, but these were not widespread within the military. And as previously mentioned, Spartans could also enter cryo in their Mjolnir because their undersuit provides the same protection. It is also known that 1 in 50,000 people exhibit an allergic reaction when administered cytoprethyline. These individuals will have trouble breathing and experience dizziness, headaches, and skin peeling or blistering, among other things. This allergy is also immediate grounds for disqualification from service, or would result in a person being discharged from the military if discovered later on. Thomas Lasky is actually one of the only people we know who has the allergy, and he was actually slated to be discharged but managed to remain in service due to the emergence of the Covenant. And of course, there is the very real danger that during the wake-up cycle, your heart will not restart. But to address these emergency situations, all UNSC personnel are trained to respond, and there are always AEDs and air masks nearby to assist in resuscitation efforts. But if attempts to revive someone are unsuccessful, they are to be put back into cryo and attended to by physicians before reawakening is attempted again. In the 2025 novel Halo Empty Throne, we were introduced to Chloe Eden Hall, a Flash clone of Dr. Catherine Halsey, who, if you haven't seen any of my previous videos on the subject, cloned herself to obtain the perfect brain specimen to create a smart AI for Operation Red Flag. These clones were altered to have enhanced brain function, and upon reaching the proper developmental stage, were terminated and their brains were harvested, all except for one, Chloe, who Oni claims is the same clone who was used to create Cortana. Now, how exactly that's possible is unclear, but hey, it's what they said. Then at some point after the creation of Cortana, Chloe was liberated by scientist Graham Albin, the same man whose brain was later used to create the AI black box, and sent into hiding on the planet of Cascade. She grew up in the West Mindoro orphanage until she was discovered by the Tavawan criminal Miko, who recognized her advanced intellect and recruited her to help with his money laundering operations. Roughly 2 years later, Oni extracted Chloe with the help of the previously MIA Spartan II James Solomon in an ongoing effort to seize control of the domain after Cortana's death. This was because, as she was her original donor, Chloe shared Cortana's neural pattern, which Oni believed would help her access a foreigner lithos, granting them access and control over the esoteric repository. Chloe was then later captured by the enemy, who planned to use her for the same purpose, but was freed by James, who chose not to go through with the mission, and instead gave his life so that she could escape. She now lives in secrecy with James's personal AI Lola on the uninhabited moon of Sunteiro. It is also worth mentioning that Chloe is already 10 years old, already pretty old by Flash clone standards, so we'll just have to wait and see if we ever hear from her again. So yesterday I talked about Chloe Eden Hall, and I mentioned the really confusing fact that she is apparently the same clone who was used to create Cortana. And if you don't believe it, here's the actual line from the novel that says this.
We concluded that only one of those clones survived, the one used to make Cortana.
Now, the reason why this is so confusing, if this really is the case, is that it's not really possible, because as we know, cognitive impression modeling, or the mapping process used to create an AI, can only be done on deceased individuals. Otherwise, if done on a living person, it destroys their brain. And we've actually seen the creation of Cortana, or I guess a potential version of the process, take place. This was in the Halo TV show, and yes, I know I mentioned the show, yuck, but it was here that we saw Halsey's Cortana clone died during mapping, as she was beforehand alive and fully cognizant, which was already pretty crazy because it's cruel enough that the clone knew what was happening to her, but she was just forced to lie there fully awake and suffer through it. But if there was one thing that the show stayed accurate to, it was that a living host didn't survive the neural mapping process. As much as I want to say this was just a misunderstanding or an error on behalf of the author, I know how involved the Halo studio guys are when it comes to making these novels, so I've actually started to think that this was either their way of retconning the dangers of creating AI from a living donor, hinting that Halsey may have created a new method for doing so, or maybe that Oni came to the wrong conclusion and Chloe was just a different clone altogether. Either way, I hope we get some more explanation on this in the future, otherwise her character sort of just upends years of established lore.